Welcome to The Father's Heart with Tom Clark, better known as Papa Tom.
Papa Tom at the Father's Heart Talk Show. And we are so happy today to have one of the best guests we've ever had on our show, which is General Jerry Boykin. And I met Jerry back in December of last year, I believe it was, in a conference. And he had such interesting things to say about the issues of masculinity that has to do with the Father's Heart Talk Show and transgender in the military. So I wanted to ask him things. I actually had read his book, Never Surrender. It was given to me by a mutual friend of ours. And Jerry is a favorite son of North Carolina, having been born in New Bern, North Carolina. And with that, anybody who has spent any time, you can Google him, General Jerry Boykin. He's speaking to us from the Family Research Council. He's Executive Vice President of the Family Research Council. He's a man of God and a son of God, and he's a warrior's warrior. I mean, this is a man that if you have any sense of being a man's man, you want to talk to somebody like Jerry Boykin. So with that in mind, Jerry, tell the audience a little bit. Do you want to share about yourself? And we'll go right into the subject of masculinity and the impact of the feminist movement and how that impacted the military.
Well, yeah, thank you. And it's good to be on your program, so thanks for having me. I grew up in New Bern, as you said, and went off to Virginia Tech and played football there and was commissioned in the U.S. Army upon graduation. And ultimately, I wound up in special operations to include the Delta Force and the Green Berets and the Rangers. And
you were the founders of Delta Force, weren't you?
I was one of the original members, yeah. Yes. And I then spent 36 years in the Army. 2 of the years I actually spent at the CIA. I was seconded to the CIA there. And my last job was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. And then I retired in 2007 and established a ministry called Kingdom Warriors. And between Kingdom Warriors and traveling and speaking and my work at the Family Research Council, I stay pretty busy.
Good. One of the things that exposed me to your background that really struck me very strongly was in the conference that you were talking about down in Fort Mill, South Carolina, the suburb of Charlotte. You spoke about the recruiting that's happening in the U.S. military, and you showed us 2 ads. One was from the Russian military and the other one from the U.S. military. Can you comment a little bit about what those ads were designed to do and the effect of those ads on the people in the recruiting process at the military today?
Yeah, well, let me start with the second part of your question first. The military today, all services are not recruiting enough people. They can't find enough recruits. That's almost unheard of, is not finding enough people. And a good part of that is because only 23% of the youth in America today qualify to be in the military. So you would think that you would want to go after those that really want to be part of something bigger than themselves, and those that are tough enough, that want to prove themselves. You know, every boy, when I was growing up, wanted to prove himself in battle at some point.
Sure.
Today, what we have is a military that can't recruit enough people. And I tell you what, it's because of the attack on masculinity. And we have gotten to a point where we are now catering to the homosexuals and the transgenders far more than we are the young men and even the women in America who want to be part of the military. The only military mission that we have is to win the nation's wars. Douglas MacArthur said that in 1963 as he stood up in the West Point mess hall and said, "Your mission remains fixed, determined, inviolable, It is to win the nation's wars. And that has not changed. Yet we are not focused on winning wars because we've dumbed down the whole idea of masculinity.
Why do only 23% qualify? Why so low?
Number one reason, obesity. And then there's a plethora of things like drug offenses, other felony offenses, not finishing high school, and there's a number of things that keep them from being able to join the military. And then, again, I say obesity is the primary thing.
So 23%, and that includes both men and women, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. So, boy, that's a deplorably low number. Isn't the military even offering bonuses to join?
Yeah, up to $50,000. Now, in my first 2 years in the Army, I didn't make $50,000. And now we're offering $50,000 to young men and women who will come into the military into certain specialties, and we still cannot get enough people recruited to actually fill the ranks of our military. And that is a sad situation. And by the way, it's at a time when our enemies are all around us, China being one of them, Russia, Iran, North Korea. I can go down the list. And we ought to be ready, but we're not because we can't get enough people to fill the ranks of our military today.
When you showed the advertisement that the Russians showed, it's a robust, ripped young man with a crew cut, and he was sweating, masculine, doing all sorts of activities physically. You could tell he was extremely physically fit, very appealing to a masculine male. But then there was another ad that was coming out of the U.S. military that was effeminate, and it was something different than what we would have expected for the advertising, as if the ad was geared toward the LGBTQ. Is that what your take is on that?
There's no question about it. You saw that ad.
Yeah.
Anyone who sees that ad would come away with the same conclusion. It was targeting the LGBTQ community. And there's another one that I don't think I showed in that, but it's an ad again for the U.S. Army, and it's about a woman with two mothers, and that is targeting the future warriors in this nation. It's targeting them with things that are so effeminate and are so far from being rugged and focusing on the requirements, the real requirements, the sacrifice, and the being part of something bigger than yourself. It doesn't focus on that at all. It focuses entirely upon an LGBTQ agenda, and it's not working. All you have to do is look at the numbers.
So you said before, General MacArthur said, reiterated, our mission statement has always been to win wars. Are we recruiting the type of people that will allow America going forward to win wars?
You know what? I had the privilege of serving with some of the military's finest. And I mean, we had real men and we had some women. And these women were warriors. I mean, make no mistake about it. These women that we had, they were carefully selected, but they were warriors in the Delta Force and the Green Berets and the Rangers. I mean, I was with men that were willing to make the sacrifices, were willing to put it all on the line, that were able to overcome their fears and go into battle and go in to win. And now today, if you look at what we're going after and how we're doing it in terms of the people that we bring into the military, it's never going to get any better unless we reach a point where we don't care at all about readiness or winning the wars. We just We care about serving an agenda that is not conducive to being ready to go to war and fight this nation's wars.
You know, I know you're a man of the word, so I'm going to lay something out there for you and have you comment on it in a second. And here's where I'm coming from with this. It says in Scripture in Genesis, after God created the man and the woman, he said, be fruitful and multiply. Second thought of that is Lucifer could not reproduce. He could not be fruitful and multiply. My take on this is that the LBGTQ, the whole philosophy behind that, is basically to depopulate the earth and specifically affect the different nations where that's incumbent upon. So that philosophy of LBGTQ is really coming from a satanic source. I'll lay that out there. And it's against human beings. It's against God's creation as he created us. And it is something that is really being exercised to place unnecessary demonic control over the populations of what's involved with. So what I'm laying that all out there for you is to say, what do you think is behind the philosophy and the strategy in our own military to promote the LGBTQ agenda?
Yeah, I think that there is a demonic element of this, and I think that it's not just the people. It's actually some of the leadership that I think are so influenced by what I would say would be a demonic influence. We need to recognize that God loves us all, every one of us, and we are required to love everyone, every creation, every creature that God has created. We have to love them, but we also need to love them enough to tell them the truth about the choices that they've made. And there are also people who have been abused as children that I think at no fault of their own, they have been abused. And Dr. Dobson explained this to me one time, that there are those who, because of the abuse that they went through when they were young, particularly young children, that many of them are just totally confused. And I think that is the case with many of the people that we see that we know are part of the LGBT community. But I will tell you that in a situation like we have today, where we have enemies all over the world, we need to be ready to go and fight and win on a moment's notice. And any decision that is made about our military by the president, who is the commander-in-chief, or by the Congress, must be made through the lens of being able to fight and win the nation's wars. And if you can't demonstrate that a decision is going to support that objective of fighting and winning the nation's wars, you should not make that decision. And now we've got the Congress, and we've got the commander-in-chief, and we've got the senior leaders in the military making decisions that have everything to do with the LGBTQ agenda and nothing to do with the idea of being ready to go and fight the nation's wars.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs. I heard a very sad statistic. You may want to comment on this because you mentioned about Dr. Dobson bringing up abusing of children. Well, the statistic that I heard is more than 50% of the children who are being adopted today are being adopted by LGBTQ parents. So 2 men and 2 women. Now, the stories that come out of those adoptions of how those children are being abused inside those families is horrendous. And it's gotten to the point where it's just, it's almost overwhelming. It's almost as if it's beyond the control of us correcting what the patterns we've developed for ourselves. In this continuing abuse, it seems to be more and more along those lines of creating more and more LGBTQ people from these other demonic ways, I'll call it, of creating them by abusing them as children. The abuse of children is increasing, not decreasing. And it's increasing along those channels of adoption, which is just craziness. That being said, the other point that you brought up was confusion. I've actually written a children's book called Luke the Light Bearer, who's Luke brings the light, and he's dealing with the issue of gender dysphoria. And the whole thing is about Luke the Light Bearer defeats the spirit of confusion. Because this whole LGBTQ status or people who go in that direction are going in that direction out of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't think there's any question about that. And I don't know the statistics that you just gave, but I find that very interesting. And I have heard of a number of cases of exactly what you described here, is abuse of some of these adopted children. But we have to be honest on this. It also happens in heterosexual families
on both
as well.
sides.
But you go back to something you said. You said that the gay community can't reproduce. Well, yeah, they do that by stealing your children.
Right.
They do that by confusing your children and then luring them into a lifestyle that many of them ultimately not only regret, but wind up paying a tremendous price for it because of the suicide rate among people that are transgender or that are living in a homosexual lifestyle that ultimately they want out of, but there's no way out.
I had read another statistic about a report, I should say, about Johns Hopkins, as much as 20 years ago. Johns Hopkins up in Baltimore, I'm sure you know the place, was one of the leading hospitals in the world for transgender operations. This is 20 years ago. And the psychiatry department read a report to the board of directors of Johns Hopkins that said, when you now have the statistics of tracking the people who had the transgender operations 5, 10, 15 years later. And the statistics that came out of that were that within 5 years, 30% of the people who had transgender operations committed suicide. And within 10 years, 50%. So long about maybe 10 years ago, Johns Hopkins stopped doing the transgender operations. And then they started it up again. You know why they started it up again?
No.
Because of the money.
Yeah.
It's the money for the operations and also the money that's being made in the pharmaceutical companies for selling the puberty-blocking drugs and those kind of things. It's the love of money is the root of all evil. We're finding that was what the data was showing. That's nothing to do with subjectivity. It was just pure data. That's true science when you get good data. And that science and that data was shutting down this process. But then evil took over it again and began to roll it up again. And I was also listening to, I think back in the days of Obama, which would be 2016, where people who were coming into the military doctors were providing operations for them, transgender operations at the military's expense, which is at the U.S. taxpayers' expense. Do you have any thoughts about that, General?
Again, I'm going to go back and say any decision made regarding our military needs to be made through the lens of military readiness. In other words, you ask the question, how does this contribute to us being able to win the nation's wars? And if you can't say that there is a positive effect on winning the nation's wars, you should not do it. And that's what we've done with this LGBTQ thing. We've always had people that were homosexuals in the military, always. But we have never gone to the expense of giving them transition surgery. And by the way, it's pretty doggone expensive. And we did here at the Family Research Council, we did a little research on this in terms of the hormones that they have to take and then the surgery that they have to take. And it was something like $40,000 a piece. And that's taxpayer money. And not only that, I mean, you saw this when I did my presentation there in December. You got to realize that there's also a provision. If you come into the military and you say you want transition surgery and hormones and everything, you will definitely have 18 months to go through that process before you are required to do anything, before you're required to be part of a military unit that's deploying anywhere. And it can go to 24 months. Now, you stop and think about that. Who in their right mind would make a decision to put people into the military, which is supposed to win the nation's wars, and knowing that for the next 18 to 24 months, they're not even going to be able to deploy with their unit? Does that make sense?
Obviously not.
Makes no sense whatsoever.
And not only is it not positive towards the mission of winning the nation's wars, but if you talk about military preparedness, it's extremely negative. It's 180 degrees the opposite direction. So do you have anything that you could add as to what can we do? What can we do about this situation?
Yeah, I'll tell you what you can do. You can make sure that you vote for and get into office people that understand the role of our military and that are willing to support our military. And supporting it does not mean supporting these radical agendas, these agendas that contribute nothing to military readiness. And I think that we've got to start at the White House. We've got to start with the Commander-in-Chief. Article 2 of the Constitution says the Commander-in-Chief is the President of the United States. Mm-hmm. So we need to make sure that we vote, and we vote our conscience, and we vote through a biblical worldview, and we make sure that what we're doing is we're putting in not only the Congress, but also in the White House, people that understand the importance of our military and have some sense of what it takes to have a robust, war-winning military.
So I take it you're not in favor of the woke agenda.
That's another one. And, let me tell you what. As a matter of fact, that is some of the stuff in this woke agenda is so destructive, because on the battlefield there are two things that really are the equalizers. You may have a larger military on one side of the battle lines than the other side, but if the other side is unified and they're fighting for a cause, they have an advantage. And that's what's happening in the Ukraine right now. The Russians don't know why they're fighting, and they're not unified. And there's cases of them killing their own leaders. And then you look at the Ukrainians. They are unified and they have a purpose, and that purpose is to preserve the future of their nation and to protect the future of their children and their families. And that's why they've been doing so well, is because of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can understand, that thought process. Is there anything else besides the voting that we could do for our own leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. What we can do is we can bombard the armed services committees of both the House and the Senate. I mean, bombard them with calls, with emails, with any way that you can communicate with them. If they're on a break and they're back in their office in their region of where they come from, go see them. Mm-hmm. But make sure that they know that you expect them to do everything they can to help build a military that can meet its primary purpose. And look, don't be afraid to sign a petition or write an op-ed. Mm-hmm. Those also have an impact, especially when the news gets a hold of them.
One of the things that we're doing right now, and even in this interview actually speaks to it, is we're using media to reach out to people through media. Because I've realized that I used to be in the financial services industry, and I've really transitioned from the financial services industry into media because I realize we're in a war. And in the big war that we're in, it's the theater of the mind. There's a psyops going on all around us through the fake news media and everything to influence us, program us to believe things that are not true. We mentioned that before about truth. There's so much that we're being bombarded with that's not true in the theater of our mind, which is pushing people into believing things like wokeism and all the things that have to do critical race theory. You can go on and on and on. It's not the truth. It's not based upon the word of God. And to the extent that we can go out and speak what is true and influence the people the other way, we can attack or counterattack, you could call, the psyops war that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, you need to, everybody, I'll recommend everybody that watches the program, get a book called The Naked Communist. The Naked Communist was written by an FBI agent who had actually been a Russian spy in 1958. And he laid out 45 things that the Communist Party USA was going to do to America to take over. And I'm sure in 1958, everybody laughed at him. But now you go back and read that book and look at what they've done that they said they were going to do. And I don't think anybody took them seriously. And several things they were going to do. And I don't have time to go through all of them. But one was they were going to destroy the family, go after the family. You know how they're going after the family primarily is through the men, through the fathers. Get the fathers out of the home.
Exactly. That's where we're here at the show.
Yeah, get the fathers out of the home, and the family structure is done. They also they said they were going to unionize teachers so they could control the curriculum and what was taught in the schools. Have we seen that? You know, just ask the mothers over in Loudoun County, Virginia, what they think of that. They were going to do a lot of things that no one believed was possible. And now if you read that book, you understand they have done just about everything that they said they were going to do. And that's why it's important for us to understand what's happening, understand how they're going about trying to disrupt the family structure in America, but also to bring America to its knees so that they can ultimately rebuild it in an image that they prefer over what we are as a Christian nation.
Thank you very much, General Jerry Boykin, for participating with us in our show to turn around America today by using media in the theater of the mind. Thank you for listening to the Father's Heart Talk Show.
You've been listening to The Father's Heart with Tom Clark. Join us again next Thursday morning at 8, right here on News Talk WSIC.